Hello, it's Sue Stevenson here. I'm delighted to be able to share with you how to radically reduce anxiety in kids without wasting any more time, money, or energy on things that don't work. So let me hop onto my PowerPoint. I'll share my screen with you and let's get started. Okay, hopefully you can see that. So as I said, today I'm going to talk about how to radically reduce anxiety in kids without wasting any more time, money, or energy on things that don't work. And I want you to ask yourself, what would it mean for kids globally, anxious kids globally, if their parents knew exactly how to reduce anxiety without spending any more time, energy, or money on things that don't work? What would this really mean if parents had the tools to be able to do this? What would it mean for kids? I want you to really think about this. You see, I wonder if you're like me and that you've heard about another pandemic that's happening in our world right now, an anxiety pandemic. You see, in the first year of COVID-19, in that pandemic, global prevalence of anxiety and depression increased by a massive 25%, and that was just in the first year. And if we don't address this situation ASAP, we're risking our children experiencing even higher levels of anxiety in their adulthood, and as adults, then passing this problem on in future generations. And you see, this is not the time to brush this under the carpet and be complacent. And this is certainly not the time to be hoping that the current approach, the traditional approach to addressing anxiety, will somehow eventually work. Because I think you'll all agree with me that anxiety rates are extremely high right now. And let's face it, what is currently happening is not working. So we need to change the whole paradigm around how to manage and reduce anxiety. We need to focus on what does work and invest our time, money, and energy into that. So here's why, for our children's sake, we need to change things now. Half of all mental illness in Australians are already diagnosed by age 14, yet most anxiety-related disorders are preventable. Now, to me, that's concerning. However, we can intervene early. When we intervene early, we can prevent that. Anxiety disorders are the second biggest cause of burden of disease in Australian 5 to 14-year-olds. 5 to 14-year-olds. The biggest one being asthma. That's the thing that's the biggest cause of burden of disease. The second one is anxiety disorders. Now, here's the thing. I often describe this as an anxiety continuum. We have typical levels of anxiety. All humans are meant to feel anxious from time to time. And then we have some humans, around about 30%, it's believed, have an anxious temperament for a range of different reasons. And I'll talk about that in a moment. Now, if we have an anxious temperament and we don't get the tools that we need in order to survive in this incredibly busy information overload world, if we don't get the tools we need, we can become overwhelmed and our behaviour can become problematic. So we're shifting up the continuum. And it can become very problematic anxiety-related behaviour, feeling anxious. And then if the behaviour and the anxiety is really problematic and that person doesn't get the right help, they might be getting lots of help, but if they're not getting the right help, it's going to continue to increase and it can become disordered. And too often we find kids being diagnosed with disorders, anxiety-related disorders, because they haven't received the right support. Now, the clients that I support, if they come to me and they're up here, my intention is to bring them right back down the scale. If they come to me and they're here, my intention is to give the parents and the kids the tools so that they don't go up here in the scale. Because these, once you have the tools, they're lifelong tools that I share with parents and families. Here's some more reasons why for our children's sake, we need to change things now. Most parents, like me, were never taught the essential skills and emotional competence needed to successfully raise big feeling kids with an anxious temperament. I wonder if you can relate to this. It's time to move away from the traditional, slow, ineffective approach of treating anxiety and keep up with what our kids need in this current fast-paced, highly stimulated and challenging world. It's time to let go of expecting ourselves or yourself to take on all the responsibility, endlessly looping, trying to find the solution your child needs. It doesn't all have to be up to you. When you reach out and accept the right help, you can fast track your child's progress and put a stop to any further unnecessary suffering. Empowering parents with the tools they need to reduce anxiety and to empower kids brings the skills and strength back into the family without needing to rely on external therapists to solve the everyday challenges kids are facing. Now, I have no objection to kids going to external therapists. I think that's fantastic. But to need them all the time and not have any skills within the family household is a major problem. So parents are too often left out of the loop and not given the tools that they need because they're raising the child and they live with the child who is experiencing anxiety. So here's your ABC to radically reducing anxiety in kids. Firstly, approach anxiety from a heart-centered focus. What do I mean by this? Well, I've drawn on here that our thoughts impact our feelings, which impact our actions, which impact our results. So, too often I find that people are action-focused. We're so often told, step up, come on, you've got to do this, you've got to do that. Or we're focusing on the behaviour and we want to change the behaviour. Now, that's all very well if you've got a lot of masculine energy. Now, Dr. Claire Zammit talks about this. She talks about the action-based approach often not working for women and often not working for sensitive people, even if they're men, because it's a very masculine action-based approach. And if you push someone by trying to get them to take action, if you're not considering their feelings and coming from a heart-centered focus, they're not buying into it. They're not going to change. It's not just by getting them to do things, to do more, doesn't change anything. I'll talk more about this later. The second one is break through the deep-rooted belief barriers that are causing stress and anxiety in yourself and your child. So this again relates to Claire Zammit's work, where she believes that, and she's done 20 years of research on this and on women, how many women and children see themselves as inferior beings. Now that's because traditionally we've had a very male-dominated society. And because of that, many people, women, even though many of the barriers are being broken down and women are being given more and more opportunities to be able to succeed. However, many women have still got a deep-rooted belief that they're a lesser being, that they're not worthy of the same results as men or other action-based women. And kids, particularly anxious kids, can feel exactly the same. They're often comparing themselves to others, or they're seeing that, oh, that person could do it over there, but I couldn't do it myself. So they've got deep-rooted belief barriers that it's not possible for them, that success isn't possible for them. This is all related to low self-worth. Then the third step is to consolidate and cultivate the new beliefs and a new identity. So once you have broken through a belief barrier, you've broken through a belief, that limiting belief that someone may have had. Many coaches do this, and it's wonderful, and they can have amazing belief busts, but then a person can slip again, and they can go back and repeat the behavior. And this is because they haven't fully consolidated and cultivated the new belief that's been instilled. So we need to really instill it. We need to really embody it and embrace a whole new identity for this to be able to work effectively. Now, this is my why I do this, why I'm here today talking to you about this, why this matters to me. Well, this matters to me because I was stuck in anxiety for 36 years and some, I'm going to say. So I'm 59 years old now, and it's not until I was 36 that I even began my journey of self-discovery and realizing what it was that I needed to help myself overcome anxiety. And of course, I still feel anxious from time to time. That's very normal feeling. However, I'm not crippled and gripped by anxiety, which is fantastic, I have to say. So as a child, that's me on the left. As a child, I was born into a family, 7 kids, and I was a big feeling child, and with an anxious temperament. And my family, I would have to say, love my parents dearly. They're not with us anymore, but, they did their best with the tools they had. However, they had very low emotional competence, I'm just going to say. And emotions weren't even talked about in our family. And I know I'm not an exception here, because I know many people that experience the same. Emotions were bypassed. If my parents felt uncomfortable with something, we were told not to cry, not to, to get up, come on, you're fine. And I, being a big feeling child, didn't handle having my emotions bypassed very well. What I did was, though, I ended up bottling up a lot of my feelings, and I created a mask, a brave mask, and I pretended that I was happy. But deep down, I was really in turmoil a lot of the time. And I know that there were many times as a young child, and even in my teenage years, that I used to just go into the backyard, or I would hide somewhere, and I would just sit and cry and just wish the world would swallow me up, because I just felt like there was something wrong with me. I felt just gripped by anxiety from morning till night, and I felt like I was the problem in the family. You see, I might have been able to put my people-pleasing mask on all day at school or other places, but when I was at home, my family saw my true colours, and that's where it came out. And I would have outbursts, and I would be quite argumentative, and I could be a bit relentless, and I wanted to be heard, but I didn't feel heard. I didn't feel seen. And my parents didn't realise that, and unfortunately, it impacted me, and I became in a lot of turmoil. And unfortunately, regretfully, as a parent, raising 3 children, the first of whom is a very big feeling child. I had her when I was quite young. I was only 20. And to be honest, I hadn't done any of this work. I didn't know anything about it. In fact, I didn't even realise that I was experiencing anxiety. I just thought I was a bit of a stress case. And I thought I just had a problem. And there was something wrong with me, but I masked it, and I pretended it wasn't there. And I didn't talk to anyone about it, ever. And when I was raising my child, my daughter, look, she's very similar to me, I suppose, in a way, because she's a big feeling kid. In my head, she was high maintenance. I used to think she was a high maintenance kid. Reality of it was that I didn't know how to support a big feeling child. I didn't even know how to support myself. So how was I going to be able to support her? Which is why I help parents, because if you can't do it yourself, how are you going to be able to empower your child? So we got to a stage in her teen years where she got to age 16, and one day we had a very heated argument. It wasn't pretty because things had just been building for years, really, and she'd become more unhinged. She was in her own emotional turmoil, and we had a bit of a hot-cold relationship. We were on, and I loved it a bit, and we had an awesome relationship, and we could talk about anything, and then in the next breath, she could be completely off. So we had a massive argument one day, and unfortunately, it meant that it led to us saying and doing things that we didn't mean. And I'm not proud of what I did. She yelled at me and told me I was a control freak. I was too controlling. That I, what did she say to me? She said she hated me, and she said that she wanted to kill me. And there was a kitchen knife sitting on the bench, a big cooking knife sitting on the bench. And I have to say, I was terrified. And I reacted badly, and I told her enough was enough. And I told her to get out. And sadly, she did. She left, and she went and lived with a friend for a few months. And in that moment, I felt like I had just completely failed as a parent. I felt like the worst parent in the world, and that I'd become the mother I never wanted to become. I wanted to be a loving mother because I felt like I had missed out on love, and I didn't want this to happen. And I felt sick to the stomach, and I really went through a lot of turmoil. But what I'm grateful for now is that this led me on a journey of personal discovery and personal growth, because I realized that I needed to change. I realized that if I wanted to rebuild my relationship with my daughter, I needed to change things. So I went on this journey, and for over my 32 years of teaching as well, I built up a repertoire of skills. I studied a lot. I did lots of research. I did lots of learning and lots of training. And I have I have developed the tools that parents need. I've discovered the solution that reduces anxiety, and I'm extremely proud of it. And this is why I'm here sharing parts of it with you today, because there is no reason that anxiety needs to grip people and needs to control their life. So very quickly, I'm going to explain what anxiety is. And many people describe anxiety as fear. Our response to what we perceive as fear. Fear plays out in our mind, and it plays out in our body. So let's just talk about our mind. So when fear is playing out in our mind, we're in perceived fear, our mind is going off. It's going off tap, and there's chaos going on, and we cannot think clearly. We are quite irrational. I'm sure you've noticed that if someone is highly anxious, that they can be quite irrational. And what we can do if we're even in a mid-range anxiety or mild anxiety, we can still be looping in worry, overthinking. And the problem is we're actually not solving the problem. We're just stuck in problem thinking. And that tends to show up in our behavior in frustration and lots of other unpleasant behaviors, undesirable behaviors. And this is what we often see in the kids. So wherever you see a child playing up or being disruptive, almost always they're anxious. It's anxiety that's behind it. Okay, so what's fear playing out in your body? You might experience dizziness, you might have a racing mind, you might have trouble sleeping, you could have racing heart, body sweats. I'm sure you all understand and have experienced anxiety to some degree. Remember that big feeling kids experience anxiety quite intensely. They're big feeling. Now, what is anxiety? Okay, so anxiety is a lack of trust. Now, what do I mean by this? When we're anxious, we tend not to trust ourselves in certain situations. We tend not to trust others in certain situations. And we also tend not to trust processes. So we might be saying, oh, that doesn't work. No, that wouldn't work for me. Or you don't understand, you don't get me. That's not trusting others. And I could never do that. That's us not trusting ourselves. We tend to be on guard and in protection mode because we're in perceived fear. So we don't trust. Anxiety is also an intolerance of uncertainty. When we're anxious, we often feel anxious when things are uncertain. We feel uncertain, we feel very uncomfortable when uncertainty comes up, when there's change, or when we don't know what's going to happen. So we like a lot of certainty. So there can be, again, goes into that confused brain because you can't think and you're not quite, if you don't feel certain, you don't feel secure, you don't feel safe and secure. So when you're anxious, you're lacking that sense of safety and security. So who's likely to have an anxious temperament? Well, you can be neurodiverse. I often help ASD kids and ADHD kids. You may have had a negative past experience and it could have even been trauma, and that can contribute to anxiety. You may have a genetic predisposition to anxiety. You may have been raised in an environment or a culture, a social culture that has not been emotionally supportive for you and has had a lot of fear-based behaviour around you, particularly in the adults. So this behaviour can become learned. So we can learn how to be anxious and become scared of things purely by what adults, unintentionally most of the time, but what adults have taught us. Just an example of, don't be scared of the dark, or a comment like that. Well, a child may not have been scared of the dark before that was mentioned, but now you put the idea into their head. That's just one little example. Okay, here's some common traits in someone who's anxious. So firstly, the challenges. Let's look at the challenges first. A child who's experiencing anxious, or an adult, it tends to be hyper alert and on guard. They tend to have big feelings. They can be easily triggered. They can tend to catastrophize and go from 0 to 1,000 in seconds. I wonder if you can relate to this. They tend to jump to conclusions, can see the world as a scary place, and can focus on problems and negatives, and can doubt themselves and others, and can have that low self-belief that I was talking about before. Now, there's some positive things about being anxious, though, and I want you to hear this. You do have big feelings, and that can be a wonderful thing. There's nothing like feeling alive and really feeling things. Anxious people, when they're not anxious, can be very kind, compassionate, and caring. They can be very passionate and highly motivated about things that matter. They can be very analytical and creative in their thinking, and they can foresee possible upcoming problems that others may not have foreseen, and they can see things that could be avoided and can point out things that could be avoided. And they tend to set very high standards for themselves. I know of someone who loves to employ anxious people because she says they're brilliant workers, which is a classic. So let's look at the solutions. So number one, approach anxiety from a heart-centered focus. Number two is break through the deep-rooted belief barriers causing anxiety. And number three is consolidate and cultivate new beliefs and a new identity. So let's look at step one. Approach anxiety with a heart-centered focus. Well, people with an anxious temperament tend to be feeling-driven people, not action-driven people. So coming from an action focus, telling them what they have to do without helping them feel supported, just doesn't work for them. Taking that massive action approach, and you have to do this, you have to do that, or telling kids what to do, it really doesn't work, because you're bypassing their core driver, their feelings, their emotional state. We've got to tune into their emotional brain first so that they can then shift over to logical thinking. And I say to parents sometimes, stop selling your ideas and telling. Stop selling and telling and even yelling. Your kid's not buying if you're just going the action approach. So we really need to tap into their feeling side and tune into their station. Their, you know, if your child's name's Mary, tune into Mary FM, and so that you've got her attention and she feels cared about. So it's not all about action here. We've got to get to the feeling. We've got to show the kids that we care. Otherwise, if we start here, we're missing these first two categories. And you're going to see the next one. So I've just explained that. So the next one, I'll just show you. Yep, we've got my arrows there. So it's feelings first, then actions, and then you get to see the results. And I'll just share a story with you. So Caleb is a client, or was a client of mine. His parents were a client of mine, and they came to me, and Dad and Mum were absolutely convinced that their child just had something wrong with him. And Dad just said he was vindictive. They thought he must have oppositional defiance disorder. He was really disruptive. He wasn't wanting to go to school. They were having all sorts of issues with him. And once I worked with them and supported the family, and we took this approach, instead of just worrying about trying to change his behaviour, which is what his parents were trying to do, then we were able to see amazing results. This family has had a complete turnaround. Their son is going to school full time. That they haven't got barely any of the problems that they were having before. So a massive weight has been lifted for this family, which is wonderful, and he's thriving. So step 2 is break through the deep-rooted belief barriers causing anxiety. So we need to help our children see and value their worth, because many kids, it's so beyond their realm of possibility, they're not going to do it. So, for example, if you're trying to get a child to go to school and they think they can't, it's beyond their realm of possibility. So we need to help kids begin to see, to break the barrier that is stopping them from even believing that it's possible. So that's the deep-rooted belief. It's their self-concept, knowing it's helping them to believe in themselves that they can do it. So that's the work we've got to do. Really deep work we need to be doing here. And this is a client, Barbara, who, sorry, just going to play that. Hopefully I can play it. Here we go. It's not going to play.
I remember calling you, Sue, on my first call from the car, bawling, crying, telling you it's all a mess, the whole thing. And I was really, really struggling. And that was like 3 months ago. And I just cannot believe the growth. Like, you create a scenario where we're comfortable to be vulnerable and open. I just cannot believe it was 3 months ago, and that everything that you said on the call was true. And I'm not sure I 100% believed it could happen, but it's happening.
So Barb has made incredible progress. Her daughters have too. And But what I had to do was we needed to break through that belief, because she didn't really believe that it was possible. But it is possible, and she was able to realise that, which has been wonderful. Okay, so then we've got step 3. Step 3 is create and consolidate the new beliefs and the new identity. So here's the thing. We break through the belief. Now, a lot of coaches stop here. The key now is, though, that we must embody this new belief. We must embody this new possibility. We must embody this new self-concept in the client, so that they believe it is their new self, so that they don't slip back to their old self. So once we step into a new identity, we then are in the realm of possibility, and then we can achieve anything beyond what we used to think that was even possible. And this has happened with Julie. So I'd love to play Julie, what Julie has to say.
The changes that we have found, and I'm going to say especially me, I have identified and acknowledged and had to realise that, yeah, a lot of this is me. A lot of this is something that I was doing or I have done, and I'm not doing it anymore. I'm changing. I'm not being that person because it wasn't serving anyone. And most of all, no, it wasn't serving me. It wasn't serving Justin, but it wasn't serving our daughter. And she's the one that we're doing this for, but in the same moment, we're actually getting something for all of us, and everyone is growing and improving and getting so much from this. But we're not even 3 months in. Yeah. So I'm excited. I just want to see what else there is for us, because, you know, I'm out there, I'm bouncing, I'm just jumping. I'm leaping from rock to rock and just like, yeah, no, there ain't no river beneath me, I'm just flowing.
This is what we want. This is what I want for every family to experience, and it's very possible. So let's just sum up what radically reduces anxiety in kids without wasting any more time, money, or energy on things that don't work. The first thing is that we need to approach anxiety from a heart-centered focus, not an action-based, old traditional action-based changing the behavior focus. Number 2, break through the deep-rooted belief barriers causing anxiety. We've got to break through that part of them in their unconscious mind that they believe it's not possible. We've got to break through that so that they believe it's possible, and shift their self-concept and their identity about themselves so they believe it is possible. Step 3, consolidate and cultivate new beliefs and that new identity. As Julie said, I'm not that person anymore. I don't do that anymore. Now she's a new version of herself, and that's what we want. And we can do this for our kids. It's very, very possible. So if you want to learn more, you can go to my website, you can email me, or you can use any of those QR codes to access my socials. And the one on the right is a QR code where you can book a complimentary call with me. So it's been an absolute pleasure and privilege being with you here today, and I wish you all the best. And please reach out if you need any support with an anxious child or anxiety for yourself or someone you love or care about. Thank you.